start painting in just a minute here. Just getting everything set up. Okay. Chat's up. Oop. I am totally having a hard time getting settled today. Okay, there we go. Gonna be doing something a little bit different right now if I can get this thing open. I'm just gonna work straight from the tube for a little while. So my goal right now is going to be to make pretty glowy wings, which is a whole hell of a lot harder than it sounds when you're dealing with this much paint on a surface. So I've wet the board, and now I'm just letting the white pigment, it's just a white gouache, kind of do its own thing. What's important to remember with white is that it does go more and more transparent as it dries, so what you see here is not going to be how bright it's going to be. The most important thing for me right now is just to create kind of a little bit of dodgy effects going on here. Trying very hard to keep the brightest white at the base of the wings. Now, since my board is curved, it is going to roll a bit. I'm going to use paintbrushes to keep it steady. Don't mind me. I am just looking for some reference pictures I took of butterflies a while back. My goal here isn't going to be to make it look like realistic butterfly wings. My goal is going to be to give it a fairy glimmer, a sparkle. And so that's why I'm doing this light white to kind of brighten it up a bit. And then I'll be using directly white. In fact, I'll start on that now. I have this awesome teeny little brush. I keep bumping the camera, sorry about that. And if you've ever done pointillism, that's essentially what you're going to be doing now. Just dozens of teeny tiny dots. Now, the more dense your paint is, the more opaque the white will be. Because don't forget, it is going to dry much more clear than what you see on here. So what I'm going for is some nice glittery, sparkly patterns. I don't want it all solid, but I do want some pretty cool shapes in there. Gonna do a little line of white along her shoulder. That's just to help brighten it up and bring out the fact that the wings are sparkly. Now, what I'm focusing on are just my patterns. I'm not worried about filling in other spaces. And all of the big dots that will be in this wing. Because smaller dots are easier to add on later. But big dots, kind of want a clear surface to work with. Your goal with this is not to make them appear designed and laid by design. You want them to have lots of random textures, bigger ones, smaller ones, some close together, some far apart. You do not want to evenly space them. And this is something to remember for later when we do nightscapes, is that nature is very chaotic in a lot of ways, and when it comes to sparkles, part of what makes them stand out is how random they are, that they don't follow a set pattern or design. Now obviously right now this is not going to look like a sparkly wing because I'm doing stripes and Milo is about to get into trouble over here. Hi Milo. But right now you're not focused on making it look sparkly, you're just focused on how can I get these patterns to stand out the way I wanted them to. I'm just looking at a blue morpho butterfly. It's one of the specimens I have that are taxidermied specimens. It's very useful for looking at how the veins move around and the different shapes they make. I'm gonna close things because I just realized I cannot see if anyone talks to me, and that's probably a bad thing. Pop out chat. There we go. Now I can see if anyone talks. Back to this I go. It's a little bit tedious, but not too terribly bad. What you want to really watch out for is too much pressure on your fingers. It's really easy to just get so focused on what you're doing that your hand cramps up. Never a fun thing, so I really suggest taking breaks once in a while, making sure your fingers still move. You can see this is starting to get more and more transparent as it dries. I'm really hoping that I can get music soon, because I would very much like to be able to fill the empty space with sound besides my own voice. I've had lots of friends say they actually prefer it when I'm talking, but I tend to lose my train of thought because I'm so focused on what I'm doing with the painting that I completely forget what I'm saying. hear splashing, I have a really nice bin here with an apple harvest foot soak that my friend sent me for Christmas. And I tend to get really sensitive to the cold in wintertime, and it's difficult to keep my joints from hurting. So we're trying having me just kind of soak my feet in a warm bath and have the space heater on. And so far I feel pretty great. I don't feel very cold or, don't have the achy joints going on, which is nice. It's never a pleasant feeling. I asked a bunch of my friends, should I finish this painting because the holiday season is over? And they tell me the holidays aren't over until January 19th. A couple others said holidays aren't over till, the 27th and things like that. That made me laugh, but it is pretty true for a lot of cultures. One problem with doing this is that the paint can dry on your brush and you end up with weird gobby areas. But just rinsing your brush off in the water will take care of that. Just be careful not to pick up too much water on your brush when you go back to it. Just doing polka dots. Though I'm not really sure these would be called polka dots. I think polka dots are an even pattern. I wonder who came up with the term polka dots. Because, it's a neat term. And it's cute. Ooh, give me just 1 minute. Had to holler to my kids to shut my studio door because they are getting all geared up to play on their video game, and it's the usual arguing over who gets to go first routine. They're old enough now that I generally let them sort it out themselves. Seems to work out pretty good. When they were little, we had to use a timer and make sure that they were fairly distributed in time. You may hear crashing and banging. That is them moving stuff around. Remember, this is just placing the large dots and getting a feel for where your patterns and your stripes are. So I'm not bothering with sparkles up here or things like that. because all I'm focused on is patterns, stripes, shapes that interest me. And one of the reasons why I like bouncing around and doing different parts of the painting is I can see right here she's holding a little magic wand, but because of how bright all this is, the wand has become lost. So I'll be able to go back through and sharpen it once I finish doing all the sparkles. Give it more life. I'm trying to be very careful not to rest my hand on this area because this is very wet. It's still got a ways to go before it dries. I was originally going to do this kind of hazy color on the inside of the wing, but I decided to go with spots instead, just because I really like the sharp darkness against the wing. I feel like that would lighten it up just a bit too much, especially with how white her gown is turning out to be. Contrast is very important. It's something I have a lot of trouble with. Grayscale pictures I struggle to see because all the different shades of gray kind of meld into one shade. Generally, I need to have extreme differences in tone to be able to see them. But not so with color, which is strange. But it's also why I would end up with paintings with very little contrast, because I was just bouncing around the different colors and didn't realize that they weren't standing out as brightly to everyone else as they were to me. Which, you know, that's something to really pay attention to. Everyone sees color different. Everyone sees shades of light and dark differently. And if you ever look at the different forms of color blindness, you can put filters on your images that will turn them those colors. And it's really interesting to see how your pieces hold up when you lose the variety of color. Another popular thing is to photograph your work, put it in Photoshop, and then invert it so that it is not just black and white, but your darkest points are white and your whitest points are black. And, you know, it seems like, well, all I have to do is put it in black and white, and I can see that, but the different viewpoint really changes things, gives us a perspective that we wouldn't otherwise think of. And that's always a good thing when you're doing art. Any way that you can get someone else's viewpoint and understand it for yourself is a bonus. This is true with subject matter as well. I met this really nice lady who told me at the convention we were at, she said, "Jessica, I like your work, but I can't stand when you do fairies." And I'm like, "What? Why? You know, what is it about fairies? You like the mermaids and all that other stuff. Why fairies?" And she let me know that she had a deep-set fear of butterflies. And, you know, this kind of thing isn't something you would normally think of. If you're not afraid of something, it just doesn't occur to you. But to her, they're nightmarish creatures with lots of legs and antennae. Just kind of awful. So I drew her a fairy without butterfly wings. She was really happy. But it does make you kind of stop and think and wonder How many times have people stopped to look at your art and gone, wait, I can't, I don't like this because of some personal fear or preference? And it's really kind of amazing because, you know, you do your art with your own take on what it means, but everyone who looks at your painting is going to bring their own experiences to it. You can, you know, say this is what this means, this is what it stands for. Usually people pretty much respect what you were going for, but you know, it's important to realize that experiences aren't universal, and symbolism is not as universal as people think it is. So you gotta be a little bit careful in your symbolism choices when you work on paintings. In this particular piece's case, I have holly berries, which naturally people say Christmas, but it also goes with other traditions like Yule. However, her clothing being 17th century, 18th century French implies that it would not be Yule. Except I'm not completely certain if the French celebrated Christmas or Yule during that time period. It's not something I've studied, and I probably should have before I started this painting. But this is a painting purely for fun and visuals, not for historical accuracy, so I'm not too worried about it. But it does show that people will look at this same painting and get a different feeling from it depending on their background, their culture, you know, all those fun things that make us individuals. And I accidentally put my finger in there, but that's okay. The great thing about doing these sparkly wings is that there's no rhyme or reason. There's no right or wrong. You just run with whatever you get. And like most people, I'm a big fan of Bob Ross, and he always says there's no such thing as mistakes, just happy accidents. And that is especially true when doing things like this, because those little weird blips and strange shapes that come out, they're all just kind of organic, and that's what helps make it look more natural and real. It's just letting things happen. Just giving a couple of sprinkles here and there because I don't want it to be too empty, which is probably the problem I have with this area too. Just a little bit too empty. And this is not, I think I've said this before in past videos, but this is not pure watercolor. I am using gouache, which is technically a watercolor. It's an opaque watercolor, which is why the white can be seen on top of all these dark spaces. And I like to do this because going around every single little sparkle would just be a nightmare in watercolor. I know there are people who do it. I've seen them do it, and it's amazing when it's done. But I personally don't have that kind of patience. I tend to get irritated with my paintings after about 10 minutes, and I stop having fun. What's the point of painting if it's not fun? So I just pick up whatever works for me. In this case, using gouache works. My hand's starting to shake, which means I've been holding it in one place for too long. You can probably see my trimmers have started up. This is why it takes me longer to paint than it used to. Just some hand trimmers, but again, there's no rhyme or reason, no expectation of things to be put in a certain area or done a certain way. So having my fingers start twitching just doesn't really affect the end result. You notice as I add more to this, the wing starts looking more and more sparkly and shiny. With most things, the brightest light is always accented by the darkest dark. And so when you want to do a high contrast painting, something with really striking lighting, usually it's best to go with extremes. Extreme dark, extreme light. And see, it's mostly my thumb that's twitching right now. Trimmers are kind of strange things. They don't really announce themselves. You don't get a warning, just suddenly your hand starts twitching, or your arm, or in this case my thumb. Which makes for drawing straight lines a little bit of a challenge. What makes butterfly wings so interesting isn't just the veins, because you know I have the veins here, but this one looks more interesting because I've got the textures and the stripes, the things that really identify the different butterflies from each other, more so than just the shape of the outer wing. I'm not following too much of a particular pattern. I do have this blue morpho that I'm looking at, but for the most part I'm just kind of putting dots wherever it feels like it would look cool, which can sometimes end up looking really, really cool, can sometimes end up looking a little derpy. In this case, I think I'm pretty happy with what my brain is saying would look cool. You see this has really cleared up a lot. You could still see the white, but it's not vibrantly white like it was when I first put it down. The trick with laying the white over this red is the fact that it's a lot of pigment, the red. And so when you put water on top of it, because it's watercolors, it reconstitutes the watercolor and it lifts off of the paper very easy. It's almost like you've turned your paper into a watercolor pan to paint on something else. So it's important to be very aware of how much watercolor you have laying down on the paper so that you know how much lift you're going to have when you run your brush across it. Tapping generally doesn't pick up. It generally doesn't pick up the color very much, so it's easier to lay color down if you're just doing little tappings, but full-on washes where you have to make brush strokes are a lot trickier and require a bit of a finer hand. It's better to do thin washes than to do these thick globby things like I do, because the thinner the wash is, the harder it is for the paint to lift. The pigments get to settle really firmly down into the texture of the paper. Doing that little stripe just to make the wing pop out from the background a little bit. I don't know if you can see how much it brings it out. Just giving it that sharp line before I go in and start adding the dots. Yeah, shading with dots is a technique called pointillism. There's a very famous old artist who did nothing but pointillism for his pictures. They were amazing. He's the one who created pointillism, basically. And of course, his name slips my mind. I can see his paintings completely clearly in my head. They did a play about his life that was absolutely amazing. Throughout the entire play, one of his most famous paintings was in the background, and as the show progressed, it got more and more filled in until the entire painting was finished at the end. And it created a really amazing feeling for just how much of their lives these old masters would put into their paintings. You know, these days it's pretty easy to whip out a painting in, you know, a few hours, maybe a day or two for a lot of artists, but the old masters would often take years to finish a painting. I always thought that was amazing to dedicate so much of your life to one image like that. You know, people often ask me how I can bear to sell my originals because they struggle to part with theirs, and I think if I spent years on one painting, I would have a difficult time letting it go, because that would represent a huge chunk of my life experience. And I'm not sure that I'd be willing to let it go at that point. I do like doing these little sparkles though. They're enjoyable. And it's amazing how much they change a piece. I mean, look at the difference between the two wings. And all I've done is just add little dots of white gouache. But it completely changes the look and the feel. It's just very cool. Gonna brighten up a bit of this part of her arm. Now this white line here is actually a guideline for where I'll be placing beadwork. So while I can paint over it, I don't want to act like it is there or is something, you know, to be avoided and stuff. It's better to get the paint down underneath your gemstones than to put your gemstones down and try to paint around them, because you never know when the adhesive is going to squeeze out and make a edge of pure white paper. Which is never an easy thing to cover up. So I like to just pretend like my beadwork isn't there unless I'm going to be painting shadows underneath it. Generally I don't worry about painting shadows under the beadwork because it's already going to be casting its own shadows. Now for here I want to get a bit of this going on over here. So I'll get my brush wet, lay water down, and then just lightly tap the pigment onto the water and let it move about. Doesn't need to be too striking in that area. I'm going to go back to my pretty sparkles. I don't know why I like doing sparkles so much. It's the same with doing, it's basically how you do stars in the sky for a lot of pieces. You can also, this is the controlled version, you can get a toothbrush covered with pigment and just spray it onto your board if you want truly random stars. But in this case it would be very bad to do that because I'd get pigment all over my face. And I can do a mask over it, a bit of a frisket and that kind of thing, but you always run the risk of lifting your color when you do that. And when I'm particularly pleased with how a section of my piece came out, I try to avoid anything that would require me to do lifting and that kind of thing. I think I'm pretty happy with how this wing is coming out so far. It's fairly light and bright and sparkly. You notice it looks a lot brighter than this side. Even though this is using lighter colors in there, this one glows, whereas this one just looks like line work. However, this one has a candle over here, so we're going to have to really make this section shine quite a bit. Now, one thing with transparent things is that generally, if there's light in front of it, it becomes more opaque. If there's light behind it, it becomes more transparent. And that's just because the light is either bouncing off of the membrane and reflecting back to you so you can see the wing membrane better, or it's shining through from the other side and lighting it. In this case, it will be lighting up the inside of the wing, and while I've already gone through and given it a light a lighter treatment with the paint, I still want to give it a bit of that foggy color that comes from laying an opaque white over a paint. It's very, very different from just leaving the white down or using a brighter color, especially when it comes to doing wings that are very clearly white or sparkly white. So I really, really want to make sure that the shape of the wing is highlighted and brought out so it feels like a solid thing the candle is reflecting off of, not just a sparkly thing in the background. Probably can't see the difference too well with the camera because it's not quite as sharply focused with how far away it is, but it's a little subtle difference that is just nice to do. Use a little bit of a bigger brush, and I'm going to go over here. You notice I'm stroking the stuff on and the water on instead of tapping because I've really used the red very thin in this area. And as I go down where it gets dark, I start tapping again. Gonna give this a nice weird looking trail of color too. I guess this isn't color. I can never remember if white is all colors or if black is all colors. Something to do with light refraction and what the eye sees. It's kind of interesting how much science goes into something like art and painting colors. It's not just red because it's red. It's red because that's the light wave that's reflecting off that we see. Which makes you wonder, is it red then? Or is it every color except for what it's reflecting? Or maybe I'm the only one who wonders that. My dad likes to wonder strange things too. Like he was asking me the other day, how come, well, he's telling me a story about students, but he asked, how come when you plant a seed in a pot, no matter how big it gets, you never have to remove the dirt? Because you'd think with all those roots growing that you'd have to remove the dirt. You know, a plant obviously can outgrow a pot, but that entire time it's growing, you're not taking out the dirt as it grows, so what's happening there? Where's it going? I didn't think to ask my dad if he ever found out the answer to that. I just found it fascinating. I'm putting the paint down for now because my hands are hurting, but it's not too terribly bad. I like where these wings are going. I do have raid tonight with my World of Warcraft buddies, so I will probably not be streaming again in the evening, but I may stream a little bit more this afternoon. Just kind of depends on what's going on. But I will definitely be streaming tomorrow. I am hoping that we can get this lady all finished up by tomorrow. She's got a long way to go, but I think we can pull it off. So I will see you guys later.